Hello and welcome to Drishti IAS News. My name is Neil and today we'll be discussing the World Economic Outlook report which has recently been released by IMF and what are the concerns that have been raised by this report about the global economy. So, the form of our discussion, this is how we'll proceed with the discussion. We'll discuss the news. We'll know something about the IMF, which is the body that released this report. We will discuss the important pointers of this report in general, and then we'll move to the specific data from this report and the conclusions that we can draw on the basis of that data. We'll discuss the two concerns that have been specifically pointed out by the IMF in its World Economic Outlook report. These concerns are the divergence in economic prospects. We'll discuss the reasons behind this concern, this specific concern. The other concern has been the employment growth will likely lag behind the output recovery. So, we'll also discuss the concern, this specific concern and the reasons behind this. We'll discuss a few other issues that have been raised in this report and also a few measures that can be taken to overcome these concerns or issues that have been raised or pointed out by this report. Then you will have a question to practice your answer writing on. Moving ahead, the news was scholars are asking, experts are asking that why recovery in employment may lag the recovery in GDP. So, even after the COVID pandemic which occurred throughout the world, it is receding or it is said to be receding. People are saying that while the economies are recovering, the employment scenario is not recovering, at least with not as much pace as was expected. So, let us know something about the IMF first, which is the body which released this report. IMF was established in 1944. Formally, it started functioning in 1945. You may get both options often. So, this is the reason behind these two options which are often used interchangeably. At present, 190 member countries from all across the world are its members, and the staff of this organization itself, it comes from over 150 countries. So, quite a representative body. Also, let us know something about the objectives of these organizations. So, the objectives of these organizations which came up just after the Second World War have been evolving in the last 70, 80 years, almost 80 years. So, let us have a look at those objectives. To foster global monetary cooperation, to ensure that countries price their currencies rightly and currencies are not manipulated, that is one of its prime concerns. Then, to secure financial stability, especially after the era of 80s and 90s and early 2000s, when several East Asian countries and then the world, that global financial crisis overtook the world. Since then, securing financial stability has become an important concern of IMF to facilitate economic trade, to facilitate international trade, especially since the IMF focuses on furthering the agenda of globalization. So, that is one of its important goals. To promote high employment and sustainable economic growth, as well as reducing poverty around the world, that is kind of, these goals represent the welfare facet of the IMF, because IMF also tries, apart from those goals, IMF also tries to help countries achieve sustainable development goals. So, we can see these goals as representative of this facet of the IMF. Now, IMF is also known for its two flagship reports. One is Global Financial Stability Report and second one is World Economic Outlook Report. Let us know something about the World Economic Outlook Report, which is presently under discussion. One, it is released twice a year in April and October month, and the analysis focuses on near as well as the medium term economic prospects and economic developments of the global economy. So, that is analyzed. It is not focusing on the very long term economic prospects of the global economy. It focuses on the near and medium term issues which are going to affect the global economy, so that world governments or governments across the world can consider those issues, can plan those issues and can achieve better growth and development for their populations. So, it considers issues affecting economies, and there is also a World Economic Outlook update. It is also published twice a year in January and July. Not very important. This report is a flagship report released in April and October. near and medium term analysis of economic issues is the agenda. Now, what this report gave in its analysis that has ruffled the feathers across the world. One thing is that it came up with so many statistics. We will discuss those statistics, but we will do a finer reading that even if we have these statistics, what are the things which we may miss even after knowing these statistics. So, one thing, it revised down its forecasts marginally about the 2021 economic recovery. It revised it down to 5.9%. So, people are saying that no, the revision has been quite marginal, but at the same time we should remember that this revision, which has been basically the economic growth rate has been marked down, is coming from least developing countries as well as the developing economies. So, they have contributed more to this downward revision in the growth rate. So, this is the finer print behind this marginal revision, or what seems to be a marginal revision in the growth forecast. Also, it has said that in 2022 it has kept its forecast unchanged, that by 2022 countries will be mostly out of the COVID impact. Then it has come up with different forecasts for the advanced economies and emerging markets and developing economies. It says that for advanced economies as well as for emerging markets, the growth rate will be 5.2 and 6.4% respectively in 2021, and in 2022 it would be 4.5 and 5.1% respectively. What is more interesting to note is for the least developing countries, these rates are very, very low. So, that forecast for low income developing countries is 3% in 2021, and 2022 it would be only 5.3%. So, in comparison to developing as well as the developed countries, these countries are going to suffer the maximum impact of the corona induced pandemic and the world thereafter. So, two central points on the basis of all these statistics which we just mentioned, and most of us will not remember those statistics, but what we are going to remember is that the two central points which the report raises are: one, there is going to be a huge economic divergence across the world. On the one side, there will be economies, developed and even developing economies, that are going to make a faster recovery in the post-pandemic world. But on the other side, there will be least developed countries, LDCs, which are going to bear the maximum brunt, and there will be a divergence. Then the other important thing is that the employment growth is likely to be lower than the production recovery, because after the COVID impact has receded significantly, even then employment is not proceeding or growing with as much speed as much the production is growing. So, let us discuss the reasons behind the two concerns that have been raised by IMF in its WEO report. So, reason behind the divergence: one, so why low income developing countries are bearing the maximum brunt? The two key reasons are that one, the vaccine access is seriously limited in the low or least developing countries. Least developing countries, we have been using this word so often. So, there is a lower income countries or least developing countries. This definition is largely based on World Bank analysis, which says that countries with $1,045 per capita gross national income, countries with lesser income than that, they are called as least developed countries. India is a middle income country. So, anyhow, economic prospects of low income developing countries, they are seriously hampered by the fact that more than 96% of their population is still unvaccinated, while over 60% of the developing and developed world has seen almost more than 60% of its population completely vaccinated. So, that difference between 60% complete vaccinated to 96% unvaccinated is a huge difference, and that is one of the primary reasons why there is a divergence in economic prospects in the developing and developed countries on one side and least developed countries on the other side. And then there has been a difference in policy support or the help that has been provided by the governments across the world in the post-pandemic era. So, in the developed countries mostly, governments were very fast in providing the ample support, the subsidies, the boosts that was needed for the economy to keep growing. But at the same time, the least developed countries or the developing countries also, there was very little bandwidth available with the governments to provide that kind of support. And even when that was provided, these support measures receded very fastly once a mere semblance of normalcy was available. So these two reasons are the primary factors behind the divergence in the economic prospects. Let us discuss about the other concern. The other concern was that employment growth has not been as significant as has been the output growth. So what are the reasons? One is that the employment around the world, across the world, has been low following the pandemic. Why? Because once this demand supply equation was disturbed, initially the demand receded so quickly that the supply has to be constrained. So much of the workforce was left unemployed. Even after the demand retained its force, the supply chains are still suffering through several bottlenecks, and that is why employment has not gathered pace. So that is the one reason. Then there are still fears of on-the-job infection, especially in certain sectors which are contact intensive, especially in the service industry. So there are still fears among the workers as well as among the employers, and that is why also employment has not gathered pace. Then there are childcare constraints, because especially after the female workforce left the workforce and receded to their homes, they were burdened with additional responsibilities that they had somehow negotiated while joining the workforce. But once they are bearing the brunt of those responsibilities, I'm sorry to use the word, but this is a reality. So now it has become again difficult for them to join back the workforce, and that is also one of the reasons why we are seeing a lack of growth in the employment. And then there has been a significant change in economies across the world, that they have moved towards automation, especially after the COVID impact became clearer and world tried to move towards normalcy. Several sectors of the economy, for example education, it imbibed the ethos of automation. That is, more and more machinery and technology based services were used that have capability to perform the work, but that does not require as much workforce, or at least as that does not require that kind of workforce which was earlier employed in its place. So as automation has picked up, later labor demand is seeing change. We are not saying it is exactly receding, it is seeing change, but there are these changes. We don't have that kind of a skilled labor force that can take charge in this automation driven economy, and that is why we are also seeing recession in employment growth. Then certain schemes were launched, or unemployment benefits were launched across the world by different governments, and once people are not finding enough the right kind of opportunities in the market, they are happy to survive on those schemes because they are not getting the kind of employment they want. And that is why there is friction in job searches and matching, and this income is also ensuring that people don't go back to work unless they get that kind of work which they want, which they deserve. And that is why also employment growth has not grown as much as has been the growth in the output across the economies in the world. So these are the reasons behind the second concern that has been raised by the report. A few other concerns are that the young and low skilled workers are likely to be affected more than the prime age as well as the highly skilled workers. So we know that low skilled workers, especially in the automation driven economies and in the automation driven world, are going to bear most of the brunt. Also, so what is the difference between young age and prime age workers? Basically, young age workers are those between 15 to 24 technically, but in Indian context, you can see it as between 18 to 24 years. while after 25 to retirement age of 55 is the prime age worker. So, is the age bracket considered for prime age workers. So, eventually young age workers are going to become the prime age workers once. But if the young skilled workers are at so much disadvantage, it is an area of concern for the economies across the world. Also, we have discussed this already, that the gap between recovery in output and the employment, that is more marked, that difference is more marked in developing, in least developed countries vis-a-vis developing and the developed countries. So, these are the other concerns. So, what can be the ways in which these concerns can be addressed? One, governments need to invest more and more in the economies by way of, let's say, capital expenditure, because when capital expenditure is done, when infrastructure development is done, there is a multiplier effect in the economy, more jobs are generated and economy rises, as well as the country moves forward, the population of the country moves forward with that development. So, one, that is needed. Two, reskilling of the population should be emphasized, because the realities are not going to backtrack. If the world has entered into a new reality in which automation is going to gain more and more prominence, not only automation, other technology related interventions are going to gain more and more prominence, then what governments can do is not to hold back those changes which are going to come, but to prepare its own populations, especially the young populations, especially the low skilled population, for those kind of changes. So, that is also required. Three, very disturbingly, we have seen that more than 96% of the population in the least developing world is still unvaccinated. All the international agencies need to come together, world governments need to come together to overcome this very shameful figure and fact, because in this pandemic kind of situation, even if one country or a significant chunk of population is not safe, then nobody is safe. That has been a learning of this pandemic, and that should be followed in spirit. Then another thing which the world governments and the international agencies like IMF, which has released this report, and its sister agency World Bank should focus upon, is that it should enable the policies and the support programs which should decrease the divergence that is going to inflict the world economy, divergence between the developing and developed countries on one side and least developed countries on the other side. So, these are the changes which need to be done to overcome the concerns that have been raised in the World Economic Outlook report. Based on all this discussion, we have a question for you. Assess the current global economy on the basis of the recently released World Economic Outlook report by the International Monetary Fund. Think over this question and practice your answer writing. We'll see you in next episode.